The Force Awakens. First discoveries. The beginnings of the Star Wars galaxy start with the mysterious nature of the Force. Although the Force has always existed, the earliest people to truly explore it remain somewhat elusive. Now, in modern canon, we don't have as many official details about a single, all-encompassing event that turned the entire galaxy onto the Force in one day. But it's clear ancient civilizations discovered its presence long before the events we see in the movies. Planets like Tython were known to be places where the Force felt particularly potent, and some of the earliest Jedi teachings mention how those first practitioners were drawn there, guided by a natural pull. They explored how one could live in balance with this energy field, using meditation and disciplined training to better understand it. Of course, the name Jedi wouldn't appear until these seekers established a formal order. But their earliest explorations, traveling to Force-rich worlds like Jedha or Ahch-To, were crucial in forming the ideas about the light side and the dark side that would define the galaxy's fate for millennia. Birth of the Jedi Order. Over time, these first teachers started to create a structure that would become the Jedi Order. It was this structured sense of purpose, centered around upholding peace, knowledge, and harmony, that gave the Jedi their identity. Canon has kept many details about the earliest Jedi a bit vague, presumably to allow for storytelling freedom in future works. But we do know that by the time we reach the High Republic era, centuries before Episode 1, the Jedi were already a prominent galactic institution. So, the seeds of that shining era must have been planted long ago, on Tython or another Force-rich world. The early Jedi developed what would become the Jedi Code, though its exact wording evolved over millennia. While the specific phrasing varies across different eras and sources, the core philosophy remained consistent. Jedi must control their emotions, seek knowledge over ignorance, find serenity instead of passion, and trust in the Force beyond death. This philosophy shaped generations of Jedi, teaching them to release their attachments and trust in the Force's will. But this philosophy wasn't created overnight. It came from hard-learned lessons about how unchecked emotions could lead Force users down dark paths. The ancient Jedi texts, some of which we glimpse in The Last Jedi when Rey explores the sacred books, contain not just wisdom, but warnings. They documented the failures of those who came before, ensuring future Jedi would understand why discipline mattered so much. Early Jedi recognized the Force was not just about power, but about responsibility. This sense of moral duty and guardianship would define them, generation after generation. The dark side emerges now. From the moment Force users came together, the possibility of dark side practices arose. Not everyone who touched the Force thought it should be used purely for peace. Conflict among early Jedi over how to wield the Force was basically inevitable. Some individuals, later known as Dark Jedi, believed in harnessing the Force for personal power, ignoring warnings about how that path could corrupt their spirit. These schisms could erupt into wars, and it was in these tumultuous eras that the earliest manifestations of the Sith came into being. In current canon, we know the Sith originated as a dark side cult that eventually coalesced into a powerful order, though the precise details can sometimes feel contradictory because of the difference between older Legends material and the streamlined story since Disney took over. Still, the essence remains consistent. The Sith were an offshoot of fallen Jedi who embraced hatred and fear as fuel for their strength. And that set the stage for countless confrontations over the centuries. The Jedi's guardianship of peace went hand in hand with the threat of the Sith returning from some hidden corner of the galaxy, each side locked in a never-ending struggle of light against dark. The Old Republic takes shape. By the time the Jedi Order had spread its presence, the idea of a galactic civilization was well underway. This is where the Old Republic, as we generally refer to it, took shape in the official timeline. People and species across the galaxy formed alliances, recognized a need for galactic governance, and eventually built a system of representation that would become the Republic. While the exact founding date and all the details aren't exhaustively spelled out in the modern canon, we do know the Republic had existed for many centuries, long enough to evolve from a smaller coalition into a sprawling bureaucracy that spanned thousands of star systems. The Jedi Order, with their sense of duty and power, naturally aligned with the Republic, acting as peacekeepers. In effect, the Jedi became the guardians of democracy, forging a tight bond with the Republic that would hold, with a few major disruptions, until the rise of the Empire. Warriors of Mandalore. During these early years, civilizations outside the core worlds had their own ambitions. We can't go too far without mentioning the Mandalorians. Famous for their unique culture centered on honor, warfare, and advanced armor, the Mandalorians had carved out their own place in the galaxy. They often clashed with the Jedi and the Republic, either because they were expanding their territory or because they simply saw the Jedi as formidable opponents. Mandalorians prided themselves on the skill of their warriors and the code they lived by. They weren't inherently aligned with darkness or the light. Those concepts were less relevant to them than loyalty and victory. The Mandalorian-Jedi conflicts reached their peak during what became known as the Mandalorian-Jedi War. This devastating conflict saw the Mandalorians wielding technology specifically designed to counter Force users, including Beskar armor that could withstand lightsaber strikes. The war culminated in a cataclysm that transformed Mandalore's surface into a desolate wasteland of white sand and glass, forcing survivors to live in domed cities. The Jedi's victory came at a terrible cost, and the scars of this conflict would echo through generations. Mandalorian children grew up hearing stories of Jedi as both worthy adversaries and ancient enemies, while some Mandalorian clans, like the Children of the Watch, developed extreme interpretations of their warrior code, seeing the removal of one's helmet as a fundamental betrayal of their creed. Several major conflicts between Mandalorians and the Jedi would define entire eras. Although not every detail is currently fleshed out on screen, canon sources have hinted at these older wars, and references pop up in series like The Clone Wars and The Mandalorian. This tension forms another essential layer of the galaxy's history, reminding us that it's not always about Jedi versus Sith. There are powerful factions driven by their own cultures and codes too. The High Republic era. Meanwhile, the Republic itself grew and evolved. By the time we reach the era now referred to as the High Republic, just a couple of centuries before the Phantom Menace, the galaxy was in a period of relative peace and prosperity. The Jedi were at their zenith, wearing robes of gold and white, establishing magnificent temples and exploring the frontier. They were not as entangled in politics as they eventually would be by the time of the Clone Wars, though they did cooperate closely with the Republic. In High Republic stories, canonically set about 200 years before Episode 1, we see how the Jedi were still actively expanding the boundaries of known space, going on missions to protect settlers and quell local conflicts. This era was marked by ideals, bravery, unity, and a collective drive to make the galaxy safer. Of course, there were enemies like the Nihil, a group of anarchistic marauders, and the Drengir, malevolent plant-like beings strong in the dark side. But the Republic and the Jedi overcame these threats through cooperation, demonstrating the potential heights of galactic unity. Yet ironically, this golden age sowed the seeds for complacency in later years. Shadows of the Sith. Even at their height, the Jedi struggled with lingering shadows of the dark side. The Sith, after all, were experts at surviving in the shadows. Though the Jedi believed the Sith had gone extinct centuries earlier, in reality, the Sith had simply adapted. This supposed extinction occurred roughly 1,000 years before the events of the Phantom Menace, following a final confrontation between the Jedi and the Sith on the planet Ruusan. The Jedi emerged victorious, or so they thought. In truth, one Sith Lord survived, Darth Bane. He witnessed firsthand how the Sith's infighting and power struggles had led to their downfall. Too many Sith Lords competing for dominance had weakened them from within, making them vulnerable to the unified Jedi Order. Darth Bane, a figure canonically acknowledged through Star Wars, the Clone Wars, reshaped the Sith into an order defined by secrecy and singular power. Bane's establishment of the rule of two, one master and one apprentice, ensured the Sith would never be large enough to tear themselves apart through internal feuds. Instead, they would become an underground entity, quietly manipulating events until the time was right to strike. The rule of two created a perfect system of evolution. The apprentice would grow in power until strong enough to overthrow the master, ensuring each generation of Sith was stronger than the last. This principle of always having exactly two Sith Lords, one to embody power, the other to crave it, would guide the Order for the next 1,000 years. While the Jedi were busy building grand temples and shining beacons, the Sith were plotting how to exploit the Jedi's weaknesses. Everything that transpired later, from Darth Sidious's infiltration of the Senate to the sudden downfall of the Jedi, can be traced back to Darth Bane's cunning reformation. That shift in Sith strategy is one of the most pivotal turning points in galactic history. It forever changed how dark side users approached power and conflict. Seeds of decline. As we reach the centuries just before the Phantom Menace, the Republic was firmly established, but certain cracks were starting to show. Political maneuvering in the Senate became more common. Corporate interests began to gain power, and the Jedi grew somewhat blind to the possibility that the Sith might still be out there, waiting. This drifting away from the frontier spirit of the High Republic toward a more rigid and sometimes complacent central bureaucracy meant that the Republic was ripe for manipulation by a cunning mind. We see glimpses of that dynamic in the Phantom Menace, with the Trade Federation blockade of Naboo and the Senate's inability to act decisively. It's the continuation of a slow decline in the ideals that once defined the High Republic era. The Jedi, though still revered, were becoming entangled in Senate politics, and the general galactic population sometimes saw them as aloof or out of touch. People on the Rim worlds felt neglected, fueling local tensions and encouraging some worlds to challenge the Republic's authority. The stage was set for enormous changes, reflections on ancient history. But let's pause and reflect on what we've covered so far. We started at the dawn of the Jedi, where Force-sensitive explorers laid the philosophical foundation that would define so many conflicts and alliances in the future. We watched as the Jedi Order coalesced, discovered the persistent threat of dark side practitioners, and saw the earliest seeds of the Sith. We caught a glimpse of the Old Republic's formation, that idea of a unifying body that stretched from the core worlds outward, forging treaties and establishing laws that bound countless species together. We also recognized that the galaxy wasn't just about Jedi and Sith. The Mandalorians, with their warrior ethos, thrived on their own path. Then we looked at the High Republic era, a bright and optimistic period that exemplified the best of what Jedi and Republic cooperation could achieve. Yet, in the background, the Sith quietly evolved thanks to figures like Darth Bane, patiently waiting for centuries until a new Dark Lord would finish what he started. All of this leads us toward the twilight years of the Republic, setting the scene for the tragedies and triumphs we witness in the Skywalker saga. Where we're headed next is the perfect bridge to what eventually becomes the Clone Wars. In Part 2, we'll explore how the Sith finally revealed themselves in the form of Darth Sidious. We'll uncover how the Republic was gradually undone from within, how the Jedi's downfall was orchestrated step by step, and how a farm boy named Luke would reignite the flame of hope. But in this first half, it's vital to grasp that the galaxy was not shaped in a few decades or even a few centuries. Instead, the tapestry of Jedi valor, Sith cunning, Mandalorian might, and the Republic's constant balancing act of unity and corruption all set the stage for the cataclysmic events to come. Understanding these roots gives us a deeper appreciation for why the galaxy is so fractured and why so many systems were primed to either fight back or submit when the Empire finally rose. The galaxy's earliest days show us that every new generation inherits the consequences of what came before. The ancient struggles between Force users taught the galaxy that power has to be handled with caution. The High Republic taught the galaxy how prosperous and unified it could be, and the subtle re-emergence of the Sith taught the Jedi that complacency can be lethal. It's amazing how certain themes keep cycling through, from the earliest known Jedi up to Luke Skywalker. The light side versus the dark, freedom versus control, and hope versus despair. Now, even though we don't see every detail of these early eras in the films, references abound in shows like The Clone Wars, Rebels, The Mandalorian, and The Book of Boba Fett. You hear passing remarks about Mandalorian conflicts, see glimpses of Jedi lore, even sense that the Jedi were once more numerous and the Force more openly studied. And that is precisely why fans remain so fascinated with the old days of the galaxy, because they shape everything that follows. When Obi-Wan tells Luke, "For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice," that line is referencing an almost mythic past. 1,000 generations would span roughly 20,000 to 25,000 years, a timeline so vast that much of it remains shrouded in mystery, with only fragments of that ancient history surviving to the modern era. We're left to fill in those blanks with canonical stories as they trickle out. The High Republic novels and comics have given us some official glimpses into just one era of this vast timeline, but there's still so much to uncover, and that's part of the magic. One of the best parts of immersing ourselves in this ancient history is seeing how it influenced the entire Jedi doctrine. Things like the color of lightsaber blades, the design of Jedi temples, and the moral codes they adhered to all have roots in these earliest eras. The choice to forswear attachment, to dedicate oneself to serving others, rather than personal gain. These codes were shaped by centuries of experience, seeing how the dark side preyed on selfish desires. Meanwhile, the Sith cunningly refined their knowledge, passing it down in secret from master to apprentice, building a hidden arsenal of knowledge that would someday be used to topple the Jedi. Every time we see a young Jedi in training, whether it's Luke or Rey or any of the countless Padawans from the Clone Wars, they're essentially living out the traditions forged by those earliest Force users. And of course, we can't forget the significance of special locations. Tython, in the Mandalorian Season 2, is name-dropped as a planet important to the Force, hinting at its ancient ties. Jeddah, featured in Rogue One, was once a holy site for pilgrims and guardians who revered the Force. These places are living relics of that past. They remind us that even when the Jedi were at low points, like during the Empire's reign or post-Order 66, there remained corners of the galaxy steeped in the Force, preserving knowledge that the next generation could discover. Outro, as this first half of our deep dive comes to a close, it's clear that the Star Wars galaxy is a tapestry woven over tens of thousands of years of conflict, hope, innovation, and mysticism. Before the main saga ever started, entire civilizations rose and fell. Some, like the Mandalorians, managed to preserve their cultural identity despite the sweeping changes going on around them. Others, like the Sith, had to evolve to survive, hiding until their time would come. Meanwhile, the Jedi soared to heroic heights, building a reputation as incorruptible defenders of peace, only to discover that pride can blind you to the enemy right under your nose. All these threads set the stage for the Phantom Menace, the Clone Wars, the reign of the Empire, and even the era of the New Republic that we see in The Mandalorian. Knowing where it all began helps us appreciate every conflict, every sacrifice, and every victory that follows. Part 2 explores the Sith's return through Palpatine's master plan, the fall of the Jedi, and the Clone Wars. We'll follow Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Luke through the Empire's rise to the New Republic, seeing how ancient history shapes their destinies. Thanks for watching Part 1. Subscribe now to catch Part 2, where these ancient threads explode into the saga we know and love. May the Force be with you.